Welcome back to part 2 of our discussion of within subjects designs, and in this part we're going to review the pre-post test design. So in the pre-post test design, we observe individuals before and after an intervention to determine the effect of the intervention. So here's a simple little diagram that I created. So we give a pre-test, we have an intervention, then we have a post-test. So the intervention may be something, let's just say it was an educational intervention designed to increase knowledge. So we see the knowledge beforehand, we see the knowledge after the intervention, and we assume that the change in knowledge before and after were due to the intervention. Now, as an experimental design, this is actually not one because we don't have a control group to compare to. There may be other factors responsible, extraneous variables responsible for the increase in understanding of a topic other than the intervention. Perhaps someone doing their own reading. Perhaps just in the case of long-term studies, it could be maturation. So this is not an experimental design, but nonetheless, the pre-post test can be very useful in certain circumstances. Let's suppose I want to know satisfaction with a particular educational experience. Let's say that I ask people ahead of time what they know and then afterwards what they learned in order to see their own self-perception of how they changed. Okay? So if we were to look at the data for this, let's go ahead and set some up here. So we could have pre and we could have post. And so let's just put in some numbers here for pre. So these could be scores, they could be survey scores. So like if you were to look at someone's affect with a bunch of questions, so it doesn't have to necessarily be achievement. It could be how many symptoms someone has before and after a medical treatment, a variety of things that this could be. So I'm just going to put in a few numbers here. And then let's put in some post. And I'm going to make it so we're going to assume that for most people they indeed did see an increase. Maybe there's one that didn't. So we observe the individuals before and after an intervention, and conducting those pre-post observations on a representative sample will provide an estimate of the potential intervention effect for a whole population. Any outcome we get with this sample will be not only a description of the sample, but also an estimate of what the effect of the intervention would be for the population. The explanatory variable is time. So when I showed you this picture, you might think, oh, the explanatory variable is intervention. Well, that's not a variable. That's just intervention. That's a constant. You might say, well, but what about if we had with or without the intervention? But that's not part of this study. That's not part of this study to have with or without intervention. If we did have a control group, then the explanatory variable could be with intervention or without. So the explanatory variable is kind of hidden here. And what it is it's time before and after. Okay, so that's what changes. We have before and we have after. But notice something else that's different than any of the designs we've used so far in this course. The two levels of the explanatory variable are before and after, and every single participant is in both levels. See how that differs from the note-taking study? In the note-taking study, they were in one level. They were in one type of lecture, they were in one type of note-taking. But in this study, the explanatory variable is time, and the two levels of time are before and after, and the same person is before and after. And that's what makes this what we call a within subjects study, and we'll talk more about that later. Okay, so the explanatory variable is time with values of before and after. The response variable is a measure of change and can be either quantitative, for instance, an increase of 15 points, or categorical, for instance, improved. So that's a review of the pre-post design. We're going to continue on and do some analysis of that later and move into other ways in which we might see this type of design, some equivalent designs. So I'll see you in part 3.